Thank you very much. We are indeed going to do a song and a play and take it to London, aren't we? That's exactly what we're going to do. It's very humbling to be up here, and I want to thank Shared Health Foundation for inviting me back to talk about toilets this time. And, you know, one thing is we talk about lived experiences and we talk about shared experiences, and one thing we all do is go to the toilet. So that is our shared experiences with you all, and I'm sure everybody's been to the toilet today. And initially it may sound a bit amusing, you know, why are we talking about toilets? But actually it's something very close to my heart because I grew up in a house with 5 uncles, a terraced house. The toilet was at the end of the garden. I was a little girl. And I remember how scared I was actually going out into the garden to a toilet by myself in the middle of the night, with my mum watching, of course, but I was still very, very small. And then, you know, the link to India comes up again, and I'd go off to my aunts in India, and it was a toilet with a hole. And the feeling of squatting and falling backwards, and oh my God, am I going to go down that hole, was extremely, extremely frightening. And then as I went through my journey and I became a doctor and a paediatrician, I realized that actually as doctors, we don't think about what actually goes on at home when children go to the toilet. And I saw 2 children that will always stay in my mind. One child who had been to about 5 different doctors, ended up with the surgeons, till they got to me, because everybody was giving them a 10-minute appointment, and nobody was really asking what was going on. And what happened there was the child was actually terrified of the toilet duck advert. I don't know if you all remember the toilet duck advert, where the germs come up and down. Thought he was going to be like taken into the toilet and you know, gobbled up. And so he was constipated. And that was it, which seemed minor to some people, but it was major to him. But nobody had really asked that question. The second child, again, had been around the houses for months and months and months. Everybody goes, come back in 3 months, come back in 3 months. And this poor kid ends up in coming back to me. I think I become the toilet doctor. You know, you have to spend time with the children. You have to talk to them. And unfortunately, that child was being sexually abused, but hadn't talked to anybody about that. So it took multiple appointments of building trust before the child actually opened up with me and told me what was happening. So just that's probably my take-home message, is when a child comes in, especially with constipation, urinary tract infections, even anxious, have a think about what's going on elsewhere. So I want to really just start with this short video, which is on YouTube, really, to sort of give you a bit of a feeling of what I've just been saying. And it may seem amusing to you, but actually, this is what a lot of children will describe. Thank you. Thanks very much. But that is actually the truth. A lot of children will actually feel that frightened when they go to the toilet. They will think there will be germs that will surround them. And I think actually COVID has made a difference now. Children are actually a bit confused. You know, I've been made to wash my hands so many times. Now, will there be germs for me? What's going to happen to me? But toilets, germs in the toilet actually do really frighten them. I'm not sure, I can't move on myself, that's brilliant. So we use the word sanitation and toilets sort of interchangeably a little bit, but I just want to take us back. Sustainable Development Goals, most of you will have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals, and we talk about those in relation to many low and middle income countries, such as India, Africa, other countries. And Sustainable Development Goal 6, clean water and sanitation, is one of the goals we are meant to be reaching. And we presume in the UK that we don't need to talk about sanitation and toilets, that we're wonderful in this country. And so it really doesn't come up on the agenda very much. But why not? Actually, we're doing pretty bad. And it's one of those, again, one of those hidden, invisible stories, really. We presume we're hygienic, we presume we have no open defecation, we think that human waste is all controlled. Well, actually, if you go in a lot of temporary accommodation, it's not controlled. I mean, there are some horrific toilets where you go in some of the temporary accommodation that people have to live in. We presume there's good hygiene practices, such as hand washing. Again, in some of the places that we've seen, there isn't any water. There literally isn't any water. Or you're in a shared bathroom where 5 families are sharing. And for children, it's terrifying. You see these big adults and you go into this bathroom, which probably is pretty dirty, and you're frightened of people, and you come out and you don't wash your hands, so you don't even get into the behavioural pattern. So just a little bit of history of toilets in the UK. I had to look this up, I don't know this. But I just thought I'd take you through. You know, we started pre-15th century with chamber pots quite a while ago, moved to having a flush toilet, which was great. Some countries don't have that. Indoor toilets became common. And then now most homes, we would think, have toilets, unless, like we said, you don't live in a home. And then where do you actually go to the toilet? So people will use toilets in many different ways. We use them for social reasons. This thing about taking your phone into the toilet, hygienic, not hygienic, we can come and look at, think about that at another time. But just think about where all the germs really are in toilets and how you get transmission of infection as well. People will sit, and actually it's a safe space, even for children and adults. It's that safe space where you can calm down and actually think, or it should be a safe space. But for many children, it's not a safe space. It's actually a scary place, as I've mentioned. They actually can't get onto the toilet, or they're having people banging on the outside, or they might think they're going to be bullied. So yeah, engaging in meditation or mindfulness, we would think, well, if we're in the luxury of being able to do that, that's great. But if you're not, it's not quite like that. So many public toilets have actually existed in the country, but we will see now that there's very few around. So when anybody's trying to go to the toilet out in the open spaces, actually even for children, it's very difficult to find toilets. You might have gone to Costa or Starbucks or wherever it is, and actually often they're locked and they won't let you use them unless you can afford to pay for a drink. So where is this public right to have access to a toilet? As I mentioned, hygiene practices in COVID-19 changed quite a bit, and we learned more about hand washing at that time. We also have to think of people with disabilities. Many of these toilets are not accessible. They're not really supporting inclusion health, and some of them are very difficult for people to access. Accessibility, as I've said, is very difficult, particularly for people with disabilities. And then we need to be thinking of more innovative technologies that we can actually use. But at the moment, we're also suffering from another problem, hygiene poverty. And when I say hygiene poverty, I mean there's not enough money. So some of the families that you will be treating actually don't have enough money for toilet paper, they don't have enough money for soap, and we make a presumption that this is all happening within their house. And we know that as well, young girls who have periods, they can't afford sanitary towels as well, and we mustn't forget that part of society who actually needs access to sanitary towels. So we have a huge problem with the cost of living crisis, and we're not talking about it or tackling it at all. So what are some of the policies? Well, one of the challenges we have is that we do have policies in the UK to tackle sanitation and toilets, but they're quite fragmented, so they're not joined up. So we have the school toilets policy, we have the changing places facilities policy, the community toilet scheme, water look, bathroom building regulations. But again, they're not joined up, and sometimes there's a dissociation between who's actually responsible for what and how we can make a difference. I don't know how many of you have ever written to anywhere to say this child is suffering because they actually can't have a clean toilet. And actually, when we talk even to write to housing officers, it's probably not something that we actually think of. So the benefits of using toilets for children, and this is because it's actually part of parenting, and we talk about potty training, and again, we think it's actually really easy to do, but it's not easy to do, especially if you've got a child with disability. It's really quite a challenging thing for children with disabilities to do. But we want to promote hygiene, cleanliness, and that's what we're trying to instill in children. Independence and self-care skills. I look after children with Down syndrome. That's sometimes quite challenging as well, and sometimes the children can't clean themselves. And that again means that they're going to be at high risk of infections and diarrheal illnesses as well. Convenience, I've just talked about that. Where is a child meant to go? if you're in a park or in a public space, where do you take your child? And then we end up with children who actually sometimes are in diapers for very long periods of time. So you'll have children, I'm sure, that you see who will be quite old and still requiring diapers because they're not potty trained. That can be a terrible feeling for a parent. They feel they've failed. And then you get the cycle of a mother feeling that they failed and they're not a good mother. And sometimes as professionals, we've talked about empathy, and we shouldn't make presumptions. A child might come into our clinic and you're thinking, well, why is that mother not? Has she got the capacity to be a good mother? She's been trying really, really hard. It's not as easy as you think. I don't know how many of you got children, but it's sometimes pretty difficult to toilet train a child. And reduced risk of infection. So I've just talked about that transmission of infection. If you're in a very, very dirty environment, you're at high risk of infections. And particularly people who are vulnerable and children who are vulnerable are at high risk of getting infections. They already have poor immunity. They're going to get diarrhea. And again, they go into that cycle that you can't break. School attendance. I think we've got some teachers here. And when you're in school, a child needs to be in the classroom, but they also need to use the toilet. And if children don't like the toilet at school, they will actually stop going to school. You might actually find children who have school refusal because they're so frightened of using the school toilets. But nobody's ever asked them about that. It's not on your agenda to ask them. So we've talked about health, we've talked about sanitation. Privacy is really important. And children, we know that the unintended consequences of having privacy, though, can be gender violence and bullying as well. And we should always think of that. Is there something that the child's frightened of because they're being bullied in a toilet as well? So some of the key things to remember when you're talking to parents, and you will talk to parents who are under 5, you will talk to older, like I said, children with disabilities who are older. Think about potty training. How is the child potty training? Are they able to potty train? And these are behavioural practices we want to actually support. Hand hygiene, but is there water? Can they afford the soap? Help them with their toilet routines. Teach the mothers some of the and fathers toilet routines as well. And always encourage praise. You'll find sometimes you get into a cycle of telling children off. They're not going to the toilet, they're naughty, they're dirty, and the poor child again just freaks out completely and they feel a failure and feel stigmatized. Most of you will have come across the NICE guideline on constipation. And yes, it's a great guideline because I led it, so it has to be a great guideline. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about more in it was exactly this at the time, was all about the fact that children will withhold going to the toilet if they are scared of toilets. And then they will get constipated and they will again go through the cycle. So whenever you have a child who's constipated, please spend time talking about toileting practices. So key challenges in the UK: lack of accessible toilets, fear and anxiety. Children will get scared, and we're not trained to actually tackle anxiety and fear very well in young children. And they have to get to a certain level before they get access to psychologists. And so all of you in primary care, all of you teachers, learning about fear and anxiety in children and how to undo that, unlock it, I think, for many reasons, is something that we need to do more. I mean, we might want a training session from an educational psychologist or a clinical psychologist on that. Gender-specific toilets as well is a challenge. And now, of course, we want unisex toilets as well, and we have to again think of the changing world and ensuring that the toilets that we have are inclusive for everybody. Young adolescents get bullied a lot in toilets, particularly. Well, you'll be having a lecture later, but particularly if they don't fit into going to female toilets or male toilets, and they are bullied a lot, and that's something we have to be aware of. We have huge problems at schools still, and no offence to anybody in schools, because I'm sure everybody tries their best in the NHS and in schools, but you'll have seen some of the media coverage where toilets have actually been locked. And I understand that. Toilets are locked because children may misbehave in toilets, they need to sort of support the cleanliness of toilets, etc., etc. But if you start locking the toilets, it's actually a child's right to be able to go to the toilet. It is their right to be able to access the toilet. Yes, a child who's older than 12 may be able to hold on, but how many of you have left the room today just to go to the toilet? Maybe nobody, but maybe a few people. We haven't locked the toilet so that you can't go into the toilet, have you? we've left it open for you. Same with children. Children have rights as well. So I think we should challenge that, and if you do find toilets are locked. But yeah, and also this is pretty horrible for a child to actually have a menstrual bleed and not be able to use the toilets. There's a number of articles, and I won't go through them all. This was another article which talked about children's experiences of toilets at school and their physical and psychological health. We don't do enough studies on this, and I think we could do a lot more research on this, and I think we could bring it to the fore. As I say, it is a human right, and it's actually a children's right as well. We're in a country in the UK where no person should be having to have open defecation. No child should be going to horrendous toilets where they're actually going to the toilet in a cupboard in a potty, which is what I've seen, because they're too frightened to go to the toilet. It's just not what we should be seeing in this day and age. Another article about dirty toilets failing kids as well. These are coming, and I think it's getting worse, or maybe it's just that we know about them more than we did before. So common challenges, mental health problems. If a child's in unfamiliar surroundings, they get negative experiences, they're bullied, they feel humiliated, they lose their self-esteem. They might see spiders, they might see cockroaches, they might see rats on the floor, and you imagine putting your feet on the floor when you can feel rats and all of these cockroaches around it. It's pretty horrendous. And I'm not lying about all of these stories that we've seen. There are lots and lots of these going on in the country. And the health risk to children, if you don't let them go to toilet when there's and leave it only to toilet breaks, you can actually get soiling, wetting, and as doctors, we'll see some of that coming back to us, and then we have to go and put them on disinfection regimes, and we go round that circle again. Urinary tract infections, withholding, constipation. And then we tell children, don't eat and don't drink, because if you drink and eat, then you won't go to the toilet. So actually then moving children towards a very odd way of living, I would say, where there's not this freedom to eat and drink when they need to. And we know that as well, it means that if they don't drink enough fluid, they're not going to be concentrating on their schoolwork either, and there's a lot of evidence around that. And then you have the general anxiety around a child. So just think about a few of these challenges. Physical danger. Toilets are great when they work, but actually children can come to some physical danger in toilets as well. Children are beaten up there sometimes. So the lighting, the environment of a toilet is really, really important. Sometimes how you get to the toilet can be a place where children are attacked as well, so we need to think about that. There is known gender-based violence in toilets, so have a consideration if anything like that has happened. I'm going to rattle through this because I think I'm talking too much as I get carried away, as I'm well known for doing so. But we mustn't forget two groups of children. I've talked a little bit about special needs children. I think they mustn't be forgotten. Again, we can make presumptions about majority population, and we don't spend enough time thinking about what it's like for a child with disabilities or special needs to actually go to the toilet. You're hoisted on, you're hoisted off. It's painful. You're trying to hold on. I could tell you more and more and more, but actually just try and imagine what being in that child's head is like. And children in poverty, we've talked a lot about homelessness today, but actually children are homeless as well, children in temporary accommodation as well. They're in sometimes in unclean toilets, as I say, shared with many, many people. Quite smelly sometimes if you're relying on somebody else to actually clean that toilet. You're not in control of your toilet space. And sometimes they're poorly lit. So you imagine going in the middle of the night to some of these toilets, and you might be being harassed and abused at the same time. So I just end with a poem that actually Sam gave me last night from one of his friends that wrote this, Paul Cookson. The bathroom has gone crazy, far beyond belief. The sink is full of spiders. The toilet seat has teeth. The toilet seat has teeth. Because again, children are frightened. They sometimes do think that the toilet has teeth. The plug in the bath has a whirlpool that's beneath. It pulls you down feet first, and the toilet seat has teeth. The toilet seat has teeth. The toilet roll is nettles and stings you underneath. Just think about that. Who likes a nice soft toilet roll and who has a horrible scratchy toilet roll? Makes you scream and shout, and the toilet teeth has teeth. The toilet teeth has sleep. Crunch, slurp, munch, burp. The toilet seat has teeth. Don't sit on it. The toilet seat has teeth. The toilet seat has teeth. But these toilets are great. Japanese toilets, warm, comfortable, air dryer, deodorizer, I was there for hours, I can tell you that. Thank you very much.